Yo Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prithivi Shantihi Oshadhaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishvedeva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarvam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Sama Shantireti Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. May there be peace in the interspace. May there be peace in heaven. May there be peace on earth. May there be peace in the waters. May there be peace among the plants, trees, and herbs. May there be peace among cosmic beings. May there be peace in the all-pervading spiritual reality. May there be all-pervading peace. And may that peace come to each and all of us. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
As the Swami said, I'm speaking this morning on Holy Mother as a human ideal and divine mother, because really she manifested these two aspects in a unique way. And I want to talk first, first let me say that one of the riches of our tradition, which has always attracted me, is the fact that we have three very distinct personalities as the heads or the ideals, the personal ideals of our movement. If you take Sri Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, the Holy Mother, and Swami Vivekananda, they're three very, very different personalities, one from another, one from each of the others. And that's a wealth. To some people, it's a problem. They say, well, why didn't Swami Vivekananda say exactly the same thing Sri Ramakrishna said? Or why wasn't Holy Mother like either one of them? But had Swami Vivekananda said and done things exactly as Sri Ramakrishna did, and had Holy Mother done the same thing, then what need was there for Swami Vivekananda or a Holy Mother? We already had Sri Ramakrishna. So the greatness of the three is that they fully manifested this great ideal of Vedanta, Vedanta, the living realization, and yet they did it in three distinct ways, three distinct personalities. It's okay if one is attracted to only Sri Ramakrishna, or only to Holy Mother, or only to Swami Vivekananda, or only to any two of them, or to all three of them. People sometimes feel bad. They come to Vedanta, and even sometimes after years, they say that, well, I really like Sri Ramakrishna, I'm very attracted to him, but I don't care that much for Swami Vivekananda. Or they say that I'm very attracted to Swami Vivekananda, but I just don't understand Sri Ramakrishna. He was too far out there for me. Or I like Holy Mother, but the other two scare me, or whatever. As I always tell people when they come to me with a problem like that, that's not a problem at all. If you're attracted to any one of them, that's fine. If you're attracted to Sri Ramakrishna and not the other two, it's not that Holy Mother and Swami Vivekananda are sulking in the corner saying, well, why don't they pay any attention to me? Why do they always go to Sri Ramakrishna and don't pay any attention to me? Or the same with the others. Thank you. That Swami Vivekananda said that Sri Ramakrishna and I did not come for name and fame. And so even if you don't like any of the three, but you like the principles for which they lived, that too is fine. And if you don't like any of it, then why are you here? It's fine if you don't like any of it too. It's just that you happened to walk in the wrong door this morning. So this morning, of course, I do want to speak about Holy Mother. As you know, many of us in the tradition look on Holy Mother as an incarnation of God, as an incarnation in particular of the Divine Mother. And so I want to discuss that a little bit, what the incarnation means when we say that Holy Mother, that many of us believe she is. That also is something which is not a requirement in Vedanta. There are many Vedantists, even in India, who don't accept the idea of the incarnation of God, even the possibility of the incarnation of God. But many of us do, and you can't read much about Holy Mother without finding that many people do look on her as a manifestation, that is, an incarnation of the Divine Mother in human form. And there are three religions which basically believe in the incarnation of God. Of course, Christianity and Hinduism, quite clearly, but Buddhism also. Buddhism is they don't believe in God, they don't believe in the self. So how could they believe in the incarnation of God? Well, the Buddha in Buddhism, especially in Mahayana Buddhism, is not really technically an incarnation of God, not viewed as one, but fills the same place that the incarnation fills in Christianity and Hinduism. So philosophy aside, the Buddha also is looked upon, especially by Mahayana Buddhists, to some extent by Theravada too, but especially by Mahayana, in a way very similar, very parallel to the place of an incarnation in these other two traditions. So Buddhism can also be considered one of the three traditions which teaches the possibility of the incarnation of God, with that qualification. In Christianity, of course, Christianity and Hinduism are the two who actually use the terms incarnation of God and teach the doctrine of the incarnation of God in the technical sense. And of course, there's several differences. There are more similarities than differences, but there are several important differences between the Christian doctrine of incarnation and that of Hinduism. Obviously, the most obvious difference is that in Christianity, Christ is unique. There's one and only one incarnation. And if you look at the Christian myth, and by myth I don't mean lies, I mean the mythic story behind Christianity. Every religion is based on mythology. Science itself is based on a mythology. Scientists would disagree, but you can see where there are mythic underpinnings of the scientific viewpoint. So the myth of Christianity, in the myth of Christianity, that tells of the fall of Adam and Eve, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, and then the fall of humankind as a result of that. It was necessary, according to this myth, for Christ to be born in order to take on the sins of the world so that once again we could be reconciled with God. And in that story, there's no place for another incarnation. Christ was the Son of God who came for that purpose, and that was the purpose of the incarnation, and there's no other place in the story for another incarnation to fit in. So when Christians believe that there's only one incarnation, it's not just because they don't like to admit that there might be an incarnation somewhere else. It's really that there's no place in their story for it. So that's one difference, that Hinduism believes that God has incarnated over and over. Christianity doesn't. In Christianity, of course, the idea is that Christ is perfect God as well as perfect man. And that's very similar to the Hindu view. But another difference is that in Christianity, Christ bridged the gulf between man and God, that the difference between creature and creator is an unbridgeable gulf without Christ, that creature and creator, created world and creator of the world, they're completely different. That's why God created the universe, according to the story, out of nothing. So Christ bridges the gap which exists between the creature and the creator. But Christ does that uniquely. It's not that once he's bridged the gap that we can thereby walk over and become God ourselves. No, he bridges the gap through love and through the openness of God to accepting us back as children. But Christ is uniquely God and man, whereas in Hinduism, each person in a non-technical sense is an incarnation of God. Each of us is, in our deepest nature, one with God. So another difference is that in Hinduism, the incarnation is not essential to salvation. It's not that there has to be an incarnation of God in order for us to attain to our birthright, our divine birthright. In Christianity, because of the mythic element of Christianity, it's Christ's incarnation and resurrection was essential for salvation. Without that, there would be no salvation. We would still be in a fallen state without any hope of redemption. In Hinduism, the idea, again, is that each of us is divine by nature, and all of us one day or another are going to realize that one way or another, and that the incarnation makes it much easier. The incarnation is the incarnation of the very heart of God, the grace aspect of God, who makes the love and the grace of God tangible, makes it accessible to those of us who would have a very hard time getting back to our true nature. Makes it much more accessible and makes our spiritual progress much faster than it would be just by the vicissitudes of life, the ordinary birth and death process over a long period of time. Also in Hinduism, the incarnation is not essentially different from human beings. There are differences, as I'll say in just a moment, but it's not essentially different. The incarnation is a human being, but the differences are that the incarnation is born consciously and out of his or her own will, whereas we're born whether we want to be or not. Nobody comes and asks us, would you like to be born? Just suddenly we find that there we are on the table. And, and so the incarnation is not born out of past karma. We are. We have past karma which forces us to be born and forces us to be born in certain circumstances. There's a particular New Age idea which is widely circulated that we choose our parents, like we're somewhere before birth and we look down and say, oh, I think I'll be born there with that couple. But according to Vedanta, we're not born according to our choice. It's our karma that says this is where we're being born without asking us and without informing us beforehand. We just find that that's where we're born, and we're born through the force of karma. That is, we're born blindly through the blind force of karma. Whereas the incarnation doesn't come through past karma. The incarnation knows its oneness with God, comes from the oneness with divinity, and consciously takes birth as a human being for a higher purpose, not to work out karma, but for the welfare of human beings. And another difference is that the incarnation is different in power, and that's what Sri Ramakrishna said. He said that the incarnation differs from human beings in the amount of power. A human being, the rare human being who attains to illumination in this life, it's a great thing when someone attains to illumination and they inspire many people, and maybe their example goes on inspiring people for generations. But the incarnation is quantitatively quite different in the power that he manifests. The incarnation during his lifetime liberates many, many people during his, just by a look, just by a glance, just by a touch. He liberates many, many people during his lifetime. And after his death, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands and millions over the period of centuries continue to be liberated directly from the grace, not from the memory, not by the inspiration of his example, but directly by the incarnation. The incarnation continues to work. As Swami Vivekananda said even about himself, that it may be that I will find it good to get out of this body, but I shall not stop working. I shall continue inspiring men everywhere until the whole world shall know that it's one with God. And so if Swami Vivekananda said that of himself, then certainly it's true of Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, and it's true of the incarnation in general. Their mission, their active mission, goes on after their death. They retain an enlightened personality which knows itself as Ramakrishna, which knows itself as Jesus, which knows itself as Holy Mother, which continues to work and continues to be accessible, so that if we pray to them, we're not praying to a memory, we're not praying to a historical memory, we're praying to a living being who hears our prayers and responds to our prayers. When we say, Holy Mother, she hears us and knows that we're addressing her, and she responds. And so that's the difference in the incarnation also. So the power of their influence, the power of their mission, the length of their influence, which goes on for thousands of years. People even today are being inspired by the example of Jesus. Today, people are still being inspired by Buddha and his example, as well as contacting them through prayer and meditation. And A couple of final differences with an ordinary illumined soul, if there is such a thing as an ordinary illumined soul, is that, as I said, they retain their enlightened personhood. They know themselves, continue to know themselves to be Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Vivekananda, not in the ignorant sense that I know myself to be Swami Atmarupananda. If I were illumined, I should give up that illusion that I'm Swami Atmarupananda. I should forget the very name and the very identity. But for them, they retain an enlightened personhood, and they create their own loka, their own world. That's something which, getting off into the mythological edge of things, and so it's not something you have to believe, but it is something many people believe, and people have actually experienced. That when a Christian wants to go to heaven, they are seeking to go to the realm where they'll live in the company of Christ. When a worshipper of Shiva desires to go to Kailasa, they're seeking to go to this realm of perfection where they'll live in the company of Shiva, live in the awareness of Shiva, and same with Vaikuntha for Vishnu. And so you'll see sometimes Ramakrishna Loka is mentioned, the world created by Ramakrishna, where he and the Holy Mother and others dwell, where those who don't attain to the Absolute, who don't merge into the Absolute, either because they want to retain an enlightened sense of personality, or because they're devotional, or because they have not yet attained to the Absolute, where those go and live in the company of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swami Vivekananda, and other direct disciples. Not like a family reunion, not like go and sit around and talk to them and ask them questions and so forth, but it's a deeply spiritual meditative state where there's hardly any form, where there's hardly any sense of time, but a state of intense bliss and intense awareness of the and knowledge of the divinity of all things and the divine personality of these great beings that you share in, that you participate in. So these are differences between an incarnation and an illumined soul who is born through the force of karma, but through discipline and grace attains to illumination. So let me also mention that there, according to Hinduism, since there have been a number of incarnations, not a great number, but a few. Let me stop here and run off on a tangent and say that right now, if you counted them, you could probably find about 45 or 50 incarnations that are traveling around. That's, in my opinion, is something of a perversion of the doctrine of incarnation. It's not that God incarnates 50 or 60 times every generation. It's an unfortunate tendency in modern Hinduism that anyone who wants to be a teacher, anyone who wants to claim to be a teacher, feels that they have to claim that I'm an incarnation in order to get people to listen to me. Why would people listen to me unless I'm an incarnation? But yes, God does incarnate, but the idea that anybody who wants to have a following has to be an incarnation, that's a sad state of affairs. Again, there are different types of incarnation because God has incarnated several times, as Ramakrishna himself speaks of these different types of incarnation. He doesn't really give a classification, but if you look in his teachings, you can see that there is a gradation of incarnations. There are those like Christ, and we think like Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother, Sri Krishna, who came with a world message. They came with a great message, which influences the whole of humanity. You may question Sri Krishna, but I think it can be at least indicated, if not proven, that his influence is much vaster than the influence just of his name. But certainly Buddha, certainly Jesus, and it appears Sri Ramakrishna, that their purpose was a world purpose. Sometimes the purpose of an incarnation is just to bless the devotees among whom they are born. For instance, Sri Chaitanya. His influence wasn't just to his devotees, but that was largely where it was. Those of you who have read the life of Sri Ramakrishna know about Sri Chaitanya, also known as Mahaprabhu. There's a great, great saint who was born in Bengal, lived in Bengal and in Orissa, in the sacred city of Puri. A very, very great saint, and Ramakrishna speaks a great deal about him. But it would be hard to say that his message was a world message. He was born, he said, in answer to the prayers of Advaita, one of his devotees, an old man who had spent his whole life praying that God incarnate because times were so bad that he prayed and prayed to Vishnu that he incarnate, and Sri Chaitanya was born as a result of that, and spent his life in the blissful, ecstatic company of his devotees. There, Sri Ramakrishna tells the story of a woman mentioned in a young woman mentioned in Bhakta Malika, a Bengali book about saints. A girl who was born to this man who prayed for the Divine Mother to be born as his daughter. And she lived a few years and then died revealing herself as the Divine Mother. And Sri Ramakrishna said, this is true. It's a true story. This actually happens. And so there was a case where the Divine Mother was born to a man in answer to his prayers and just lived for a few years to bless him and then passed away. So there are different types of incarnations. But as far as the world incarnations, those who come with the world message and with the world influence, there's certain signs of an incarnation. One is that they have tremendous transformative power, as I've already said. They transform many, many people. And that certainly we see not only in the life of Ramakrishna, but we see in the life of Holy Mother. The many, many people who came to her, and all of them were transformed. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a bit. Another sign of an incarnation is that his teachings or her teachings begin to manifest spontaneously, even without the active preaching of their followers. And the ideas and the ideals for which they live begin to manifest spontaneously in places even without the active teaching. And that I want to go into examples of that, but probably some of you have heard of examples of people who let me back up and say that have seen examples of the ideas of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and the Holy Mother, which spring up in unexpected places. You see their ideas springing up in Christian churches across the country. You see them springing up in New Age circles. You see them springing up in unexpected places. And another sign of an incarnation is that even after their death, and associated with the last sign, even after their death, they make their own followers. Swami Ritajananda, who was for many years the head of the center outside of Paris, in Gretz, he said that one day a group of gypsies from the south of France came to him and told him that, Swami, we believe that Sri Ramakrishna is going to be born amongst us when he comes again. He said he would be born again in 200 years, and we think he'll be born amongst us. And Swami Ritajananda asked why, and they said, well, he said he would be born to the northwest. We are to the northwest, long ways to the northwest, but still to the northwest. And he said that he would be reborn among a band of minstrels, and we are minstrels. And so we're convinced that he'll be born amongst us. And these were people who came to that conclusion, right or wrong, that doesn't matter to me. But it's a wonderful thing that these people were not people who had been to Vedanta societies. They weren't people who had invited swamis to come to speak to them or anything. This is something that they had come to on their own. And there are people like even some of you knew very well Eugene Condon, who himself told me back in 1986 how it was that he went one day to his sister's house when his life was in shambles, and he felt this wave of love coming over him and entering into him, and he didn't know where it was coming from. He had never felt anything like that before. And then he looked around and looked up and saw a picture of Sri Ramakrishna on the wall, and saw that the waves of love were coming from that picture and washing over him, bathing him in and transforming him in these waves of love. And he had never heard of nor seen Sri Ramakrishna before that. And that was the beginning of his relationship with Sri Ramakrishna. And so the incarnations carry on their work after their death as well, in their own way. So a question comes, if many of us believe that Sri Ramakrishna was an incarnation, could Holy Mother be an incarnation as well? Could God incarnate twice in two bodies at the same time? You'd have some God over here and some God over there, and how would they communicate with each other, and how would God work? It would be a schizophrenic sort of situation for God. But no, that's because we look on God as we look on ordinary human beings. First of all, according to Vedanta, as I said, each one of us is an incarnation of God. Each of us is an incarnation. Not in the technical sense that we were born freely out of our own will in order to help humanity. No, we were born through the force of karma. But again, in Hinduism or in Vedanta, there's not the radical difference between the incarnation and other beings. There's a difference in their source. One is born consciously and the other not, but otherwise their nature is the same. When we realize ourself, the Atman, we realize the same self that the incarnation realizes within himself or herself. And so if everyone is an incarnation, then that doesn't confuse God, then why should two special incarnations confuse God? Another thing is that we tend to think of God in spatial terms. We think that, well, if God is in Holy Mother and God is incarnated in Ramakrishna, then you've got some here and some there. But no, God is not spatial. God is beyond space and beyond time. It's only space that can be divided. It's only space that you can put a line through and say, okay, some is here and some is there. Where there's no space, there can be no division. And so the idea of God is, not just according to Vedanta, but according to Christianity, Judaism, etc., Islam, that God is omnipresent, meaning that the whole of God is in every point, everywhere. The whole of God exists everywhere. Because God can't be divided. God is not spatial. And so for that reason also, there's no problem with God being incarnated in two bodies at the same time. And then there's no exclusion at the level of God. If you look at the Hindu deities, Shiva and Vishnu, Durga and so forth, all of them are considered to be the whole of God, but different faces of the same God. So again, if God isn't confused by that, he's not going to be confused by this. And God can appear to different people at the same time. I could be in, I wish I could be, in somewhere praying to God and God appear to me while you're somewhere else praying and God appears to you. That's not, that also is the nature of God, the omnipresent nature of God. So that's not a problem. When I was, years ago, when I first went to Southern California after I came back from India, there was a devotee originally from Chicago named Atmaram, who lived in the colony around the Hollywood Temple. And people used to joke, by that time he was a very elderly man, and people used to joke that when Atmaram is out driving, don't bother praying to God because God is too busy protecting Atmaram and all the other drivers on the road. He has no time or chance to answer your prayers. But of course, actually, that also is not a problem for God. He hears millions upon millions praying at the same time. Sri Ramakrishna said that he hears even the footfall of an ant. So again, that's not a problem. So about Holy Mother's being an incarnation, Sri Ramakrishna himself said so many things about the Holy Mother, that she was the Divine Mother Sarada herself. He said that he had brought her to, he himself told her that he had brought her to manifest a divine motherhood on earth, to show a divine motherhood on earth. He used to say things like, he told his nephew Hriday, that if you insult me, then that's okay. But if you insult the one that's in her, no one in the three worlds can save you. Not meaning by that Holy Mother was a scary person. She wasn't scary, but meaning that he should treat her with great respect, because even greater respect than was to be shown to himself. And so he many times spoke about the greatness of Holy Mother. Once Latu Maharaj, his disciple, his young boy disciple, a boy means he was probably in his mid-teens, Latu Maharaj was sitting in meditation, and Ramakrishna came and said, "What are you doing? The one on whom you're meditating is there in the Nahabat cooking. You go and help her. What are you sitting here meditating for?" meaning that you're meditating on the Divine Mother, but the Divine Mother's over there and she needs your help. You go and help her, and that will be better than your meditation. And so in so many ways, Ramakrishna pushed the Holy Mother forward in the eyes of others and in her own eyes. Holy Mother, after Ramakrishna passed away, she wanted to disappear herself. She just wanted to enter into samadhi and in meditative union with Sri Ramakrishna and not return. And over again, Ramakrishna appeared to her and said, "No, you have work to do. I've left so many people here for you." In different ways, he would say at different times when he would appear to her, saying that, "You see, the people of Calcutta, they're living like worms. You must go and help them out of the darkness in which they're living." Or he'd say that again, that I've left you to manifest a divine motherhood on earth. You have a lot of work to do. And so finally she understood that. There was, of course, the famous incident with her niece Radhu. Radhu was crazy. Radhu was very, very troublesome, and she, from the time she was a little baby, Holy Mother was still in that very abstracted mood where she wanted to enter into samadhi and just to leave the world and leave the body in a state of ecstasy. And Ramakrishna appeared to her and said, "Look, this is your Yoga Maya," pointing to this little girl, Radhu, crawling on the floor. "Attach your mind to her, and in that way stay in the world." And so from that time, Holy Mother attached her mind to Radhu, this little girl, and even though she was so terribly troublesome to the Holy Mother, the Mother kept her mind fixed on Radhu until the time she was ready to die. And that's a unique thing also. We have so much trouble pulling our mind away from things that it should be easy to pull the mind away from, things that give us so much trouble, and yet we can't let go of them because we're attached in a perverse way to troublesome things. Just can't let go of them. And yet here was Holy Mother who had to force her mind onto something in order to keep it in the world. That's not our problem. That was Holy Mother's problem. And when she knew that the time was coming for her to die, she severed that attachment immediately. Swami Saradananda, one of the disciples of Ramakrishna who attended on the Holy Mother, when he saw that Holy Mother was apparently on her deathbed, and he wanted to keep Mother in the world for the welfare of all. So he thought, well, Mother has always had such an attachment for Radhu, let me bring Radhu in, and Mother's mind will come back to the world, and she'll hold on, and she'll live yet again. So he brought Radhu in, and Holy Mother said, "No, the Maya is gone. That's over. Get out. I can't be fooled in that way again." Meaning that she had taken her mind back. She had placed her mind there willfully. It wasn't out of ordinary attachment. She had placed her mind willfully so that she could stay in the world and do the work that she had to do. Her mind, the tendency of her mind was to go so high. Swami Turiyananda, one of the disciples of Ramakrishna, said that the Holy Mother's mind never went below the level of the throat. For those of you who are familiar with the Kundalini system, the idea of the Kundalini with different centers of consciousness, where our consciousness rises to different centers. Usually it lives at the navel level and below. Spiritual awakening comes when the consciousness awakens at the heart. The throat is a very high center, and he said that her mind never came below the level of the throat, which is a very high state. Swami Vivekananda used to say, but wrote some of his most beautiful letters about the Holy Mother, and told his brother disciples that I'm a little narrow on this point, but those who can't understand but you must try to understand the Mother. That whether you understand Sri Ramakrishna, the Master, or not, that's okay. But the Mother was the Divine Mother herself, and spoke of her in the most extraordinary terms. Swami Premananda did the same. And so all of them looked on the Holy Mother as this extraordinary manifestation of the Divine Mother. Swami Brahmananda, the great disciple of Ramakrishna, who in one sense was the closest of the disciples to Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Vivekananda was the greatest of the disciples according to all, including Ramakrishna, but Swami Brahmananda was in one sense the closest to Sri Ramakrishna, the one that Sri Ramakrishna brought into the world for himself, for his own eternal companion. So Swami Brahmananda, when he would go to Holy Mother, he would lose all outer consciousness, and his whole body would be trembling, and he'd act like this big, if you've seen pictures of him, this big man, big, hefty man, he would act just like a little boy, trembling, and he wouldn't even be able to see anything. His outer consciousness was gone, and he'd have to be led by his hand into the presence of the Holy Mother. You might say, well, what was the use in going to see Holy Mother if he couldn't even see her? Well, because he was seeing the real Holy Mother. He was seeing the Divine Mother, the Holy Mother, as the Divine Mother herself. He didn't need to see the physical manifestation of the Holy Mother. He was really seeing the Holy Mother. So the Holy Mother was looked upon by the direct disciples, by Sri Ramakrishna himself, as the Divine Mother. Swami Ashokananda, who was a great Swami of this country, he was the one who helped Swami Saprakashananda first come here to St. Louis. Swami Ashokananda used to say that when he was young and was a devotee, planning to become a monk, and he was very inspired by Swami Vivekananda especially, but he thought that Holy Mother, well, probably she's not the great as people say. It's just because she was the wife of an incarnation, so people make a big deal about her. And he thought that, didn't think much of Holy Mother. He'd never seen her, but he just thought that probably eulogy because she was the wife of a great man. But then one day he said he was walking down the streets of Calcutta when suddenly he felt veil after veil falling from his eyes, and then he understood in a deep spiritual way, through his spiritual awareness that awakened at that time, that yes, the Holy Mother was the Divine Mother herself. And so I said I'm going to speak about Holy Mother as a human ideal. Let me say a little bit about that. Holy Mother is a human ideal and as the Divine Mother. I'll concentrate now in the remaining time on Holy Mother as a human ideal. The importance of human relationships in our life can't be underestimated. The importance of relationships in our childhood and in our adulthood can't be overemphasized. Most of our problems in life come from problematic human relationships, and most of our joys in life come from human relationships. The human fabric is the most important element in our life other than the spiritual. And so human relationships are extremely important. And there were some of the incarnations of God who manifested primarily ideal human relationships. And I think in particular of Sri Rama, Ramachandra or Ram, the incarnation in India, the center of the epic, the Ramayana. Whether Rama lived, whether Krishna lived, there's no historical proof. I myself believed that both of them did because myths usually have some historical core, and both of them introduce something unique into human society. I won't go into that because that would be a long tangent, but let me just say that Rama manifested in particular the ideal human relationships. In the West, where we had, religiously speaking, the human relationships that we had modeled for us were those of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel at the beginning of society. And those all were troubled relationships, whereas Sri Ram, he manifested ideal human relationships, what the ideal son would be like, what the ideal elder brother would be like. His brother Lakshman represented the ideal younger brother, his wife Sita, the ideal wife. He was the ideal king. In so many ways, the human relationships, the ideal human relationships were established in Indian society, and even further than Indian society, wherever Indian society had its influence in Asia. The story of the Ramayana influenced the pattern of human relationships. And Holy Mother's life, you find that she also manifested an ideal human relationships, and in a very beautiful way. Sometimes people are intimidated by an ideal example. They see Holy Mother and think that, well, I could never live up to that. People, great beings like Rama and the Holy Mother and others, those who especially pattern human relationships, and I would put Swami Vivekananda in that category also. Sri Ramakrishna less, because Sri Ramakrishna was in such a spiritual state that he manifested more the divine relationships. But Holy Mother and Swami Vivekananda manifested the ideal human qualities to an extraordinary extent. And they didn't do that in order to intimidate us. They didn't do it to make us feel bad that, well, I can't live like she did, so what am I worth? No, they did it so that they could inspire us. As Sri Ramakrishna said about himself, I've made the mold, now cast yourself in it. That is, by thinking about him, one could imbibe his qualities. By thinking about the Holy Mother, we can approach the Holy Mother and approach her qualities. By thinking about Swami Vivekananda, we can approach the qualities of Swami Vivekananda. That's what an ideal is for. It's not there to intimidate us. It's there to inspire us and to give us knowledge of, well, that's what I can go towards. I don't need to remain what I am. I can go towards that. And every step towards that I go, I'll be the better for it. There are many things that could be said about Holy Mother and her human and the human ideals that she represented. Many things could be said about her. Many more things could be said about her as the Divine Mother as well. But let me say a few words now in the remaining time about Holy Mother and the modern woman. That's something that seems like almost a contradiction, or two things that are in opposition to each other, Holy Mother and a modern woman. Where Holy Mother lived a very traditional life. She was hidden away from society. It was said in Dakshineshwar, even by the manager of the temple, that somebody asked her, does the wife of the Paramahamsa live here? And he said, well, I hear that she does, but I've never seen her. And that was after years and years of his living and working at the temple garden, and Holy Mother living right there. And after years, he said, well, I hear that she does, but I've never seen her. And so that's not exactly the typical modern woman. She lived a life of great service in the home. She had little contact with the outside world. And so in so many ways, she seems to be old India, and so contrary to modern ideals of womanhood, and certainly where modern women want to go. So as she was married as a child, she was 5 years old when she was married, and that too, obviously, when she was 5 years old, it wasn't a love marriage, it was an arranged marriage. She lived all of her life mostly almost in purdah, that is behind a veil, unseen by men and so forth. By the end of her life, she couldn't even sign her name. At one point in her life, she had learned to read and write, but not very much. She just learned to read and write. But for many years, she had occasion to do neither one. And at the end of her life, somebody asked her, one of her disciples asked her for her autograph. And she scrawled and scrawled and scrawled and couldn't produce anything that even looked close to her name, and had to give up. She used to say about one of her disciples in Jairambati, maybe it was in Udbodhan, I can't remember now, but one of her disciples, she had a clock, a wind-up clock, and she couldn't figure out how to wind it up. And so she'd have one of her disciples wind it for her, and she would talk about how clever this young man was because he knew how to wind a clock. And so here was this extremely simple woman who lived such an isolated and traditional life, and yet the real picture is, I think, quite different. Jesus himself said in the Christian scripture that I came not to destroy but to fulfill. I came not to destroy but to fulfill. And Holy Mother was very much like that, as was Ramakrishna. Both of them were quiet revolutionaries, as was Christ. They weren't the type who went out and cracked people over the head and said, you've got to change and you've got to do this, and this has to go and that has to go, and this has to be instituted and that has to be changed about society. No, they led their quiet lives, but their quiet lives were revolutionary. Swami Vivekananda was somewhat different, and that's why Sri Ramakrishna needed someone like Vivekananda, because he confronted the ills of society more directly. But Holy Mother and Sri Ramakrishna, and Holy Mother in particular, her way was quietly revolutionary. She was very extremely gentle by nature, as you know. But for instance, as an example, she was against child marriage. She had been she'd been married when she was 5 years old, in the old tradition of child marriage. But she was opposed to that. She would get upset when devotees would want to marry their children off as children. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the practice in India at that time, It was a betrothal that was permanent, but it was a betrothal. So the children were married and then remained in their own homes, respective homes, until a certain age of maturity, and then they came to live together. But she was opposed to that practice and told people, why should you rush them into marriage? Let them grow up, let them go to school, let them get an education. Once Golap Ma, on another side of her personality, once Golap Ma, one of her attendants, asked her mother, why is it that sometimes you are so willful? Sometimes you disagree with Sri Ramakrishna even. And mother said, well, is it ever possible for one to agree with another completely? And so she just took it as natural. There were times when Sri Ramakrishna crossed her and he wouldn't let him cross her, especially in the field of her emerging divine motherhood. When he told her not to do something, when she wanted to do it for the welfare of another, then she wouldn't accept his advice, but would stand her own ground. And so again, gentle though she was strong. There was the case where after Sri Ramakrishna had passed away, one of his disciples, Harish, who was a very good devotee, but he lost his senses, he lost his mind. And at this period, when he was out of his senses, he went to Jairambati from Calcutta, where Holy Mother was, and he attacked her. The Holy Mother was outside the house, and he saw her and started chasing her. And so Holy Mother started running around the house, and here was Harish running around after her, and they were running around and around the house until she realized that he could run harder and longer than she could, and she was giving out of the power to keep running. So she turned around, faced him, threw him to the ground, jumped on top of his chest, grabbed his tongue and slapped him in the face, slapped him until he was silly, and until others could hear the commotion and come and help her. When she needed to, she could manifest tremendous strength. That to a Western woman may not seem like much, but if you read about the circumstances in which Holy Mother lived, to think that she could do that was a tremendous thing. And so gentle though she was, she had a tremendous strength. And though she lived in a very traditional family, in a very traditional society, at a traditional time, when widows were expected not to wear any border on their cloth, they were expected to shave their heads, or at least close crop their hair. They weren't to wear any jewelry or any ornament or anything like that. Holy Mother went against all of those traditions, because Ramakrishna appeared to her and told her, where have I gone? After he had physically died, he appeared to her and said, where have I gone? It's like going from one room to another. I'm still here. So for the rest of her life, she kept a red border on her cloth. She kept her long hair, as you see in the pictures, which were all taken long after Ramakrishna had passed away. She kept bangles on her wrists and so forth. And so that opened the way for other widows also after her to escape that fate of having to live such a harsh life. She accepted Josephine MacLeod and Sarah Bull, which again, to a Westerner, not knowing the situation there, they said, what's the big deal? We accept people from all different countries. But no, for an Orthodox woman, and particularly an Orthodox widow at that time, to accept into her home and accept with great affection and great show of affection two Western women who were considered not even part of the caste system as mlechas. She invited them into her home and accepted them as her own children. And so that breadth of mind and heart, which again, it's only if you understand the situation she lived in, can you understand the importance of these things that she did and how revolutionary they were, and therefore how they, knowing how revolutionary they were in her situation, then it applies to our situation as well, to the Western situation as well. Sister Nivedita said of her, Vivekananda's Irish disciple, Sister Nivedita, said of the Holy Mother that I never saw her fail to give the broadest judgment on any situation that was brought to her, no matter how far that situation was from her own experience, no matter how far removed a situation was from her own limited experience of life. She said that the Holy Mother never failed to give the broadest and most liberal insight into that situation. And so that breadth of mind that she had, that breadth of heart that she had, which included everyone. She herself had wanted education when she was young. She wanted to go to school. her nephew Hridoy prevented her from going to school. But even then, she would secretly go to her niece, Lakshmi Didi, Ramakrishna's niece, and study with her after she would return home from school so that she could learn to read and write. And the rest of her life, she promoted women's education. When people would say that they were looking for a husband for their young daughter, she'd say, "Why are you doing that? Why not send her to school? She'll be a help to society if she learns to read and write. Don't rush them into marriage. Let them get an education first." So in all of these ways, Holy Mother showed great breadth, great liberality, great sympathy, the power to empathize with people in other situations. It's the first time we know in history, the first time ever that we see in history, that the Shakti, that is the female partner of an incarnation, was his equal. That Sri Ramakrishna himself treated her as an equal, looked on her as an equal, taught others to look on her as an equal, left her behind after he passed away, and she took his place as the leader of the spiritual movement. It was the first time that not only was she wasn't just a figurehead, but she actually was a leader of the movement, and the most important leader of the movement. Vivekananda was charged with spreading Sri Ramakrishna's message, but even he, if he ever had doubt about something he should do, he would go to the Holy Mother and ask her advice. For instance, before coming to the West, he wrote to her from South India and said, "I feel that Sri Ramakrishna is calling me to the West. What should I do?" And it was only after she wrote back and said, "Yes, I believe he is calling you to the West, you should go," that he said, "Well, that settles it, then I'll go." There were times when Vivekananda did something and Holy Mother said, "No, that shouldn't be done." And immediately Vivekananda dropped it without further comment. He didn't complain and say, "Oh, well, if Mother says so, what can I do? I wanted to do it, but Mother said no, so I think she's wrong, but no. When she said no, then that was the end of it. It was never raised again. For instance, the time when there was a servant who had stolen something in the Belur monastery, and Vivekananda threw the servant out, fired him and threw him out. And the servant went to Holy Mother and said, "Mother, I'm a poor man, I have nothing. My family will starve if I have no employment. I'm sorry for what I did, but I was doing it for my family, and I won't do it again. But please help me, because otherwise me and my family will starve." And so Holy Mother sent the servant back with Swami Premananda, who was there in Calcutta. She told him, "Baburam, you take the servant back and tell Noran that I said that he should be reinstated." And so here comes Swami Premananda leading this servant back to Belur Mutt, and Swamiji sees it and says, "Look, what a fool Baburam is. Here he's bringing that thief back into the ashram after I've thrown him out." And so Swami Premananda just quietly said, "Swamiji, Holy Mother said that he should be reinstated." And that was the end of it. There was no further discussion. Then without complaint, without any second thought, then Swamiji gave him his position back gladly. And so that, many, many instances of such things where Swamiji and others would unquestioningly accept her judgment. So it's the first time that we know of such a one to become the leader of a great spiritual movement, who made decisions, and whose decisions were carried forward implicitly by those who were beneath her. And so the Holy Mother, though she may not seem like a modern woman, in many ways she opened the way for modern women, both in India and in the West. And so you can see her, just as Swamiji said of all incarnations, you can see her as at the meeting point between the old and the new, between the old and the modern. Swamiji said that each great incarnation of God rides the crest of a great wave, which washes over society, a wave which is part old and part new. And so the Holy Mother manifested that which was old India, and yet she made way for new India, but not just India, but for the world, by opening herself to the world and opening herself to all people, not closing herself from anyone, not just from these Western disciples, because she had Western men disciples also, like Swami Atulananda, Gurudas Maharaj, who was from America. But also to lowly people within India itself. There was Amjad, the Muslim carpenter, who Holy Mother herself knew that he had been a thief, that he had been a robber, and not just a petty thief, but a big-time thief, a real criminal. And yet she accepted him just as she did others. And when her nieces didn't want to get close to him because of his past and because he was not part of Hindu society, not part of Orthodox society, the Holy Mother would ask them to give food to Amjad when he would come to Jairamati. From a distance, they would pitch the food onto his plate, not wanting to get close. And Holy Mother said, "Can anyone enjoy food when it's served like that? Here, I will do it." And so she herself would serve him lovingly. And when people asked her why she let him come around her when he was not a good person, she said, "No, he's my son just as Sharat, just as Swami Saradananda, Ramakrishna's disciple, is my son." And so she accepted all. In conclusion, I'll just mention that there are many aspects of Holy Mother that we haven't even realized at this time. I'm quite sure that only time, long centuries, many aspects of Holy Mother's being and power will manifest with time. If you look at the beginnings of Christianity and Buddhism, the way that the early Christians looked on Christ, the way that early Christians looked on Mary, the way that the early Buddhists looked on the Buddha, they saw their greatness, they saw their spiritual greatness, knew them to be great and extraordinary beings with momentous import to the world. And yet it was only with centuries that different aspects of these great beings began to manifest and people began to understand more and more. And even now people are still writing books about the significance and meaning of the life and being of Christ and of Buddha. The same will be true of Holy Mother, that many things that we overlook now when we read her life, those will come to be seen, full of meaning, full of significance. And sort of the cosmic aspect of the Holy Mother, as well as of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, will become manifested. That more and more of that will be seen. We'll see greater and greater cosmic meaning in every little act that they did, because an incarnation is one who manifests divinity here on earth. And so everything that they do, everything that they say is significant. There's nothing that they did, nothing that they said, which doesn't convey meaning, which doesn't convey deep philosophy. And it takes time for people to begin to realize the extent and depth of the message which they came to give. Vivekananda used to tell his brother disciples while Ramakrishna was still alive that every word that the Master utters is so full of deep philosophy. And he was challenged on that point. And he said, "Well, I can speak for hours on anything that the Master has said." And so the other disciples challenged him and said, "Well, what about this saying that Sri Ramakrishna, these words that Sri Ramakrishna said?" And so Swamiji started talking about those words and talked for 2 days about these words that Sri Ramakrishna had said. And then the others said, "Okay, that's enough. we get the point." And so the same can be said of Holy Mother. Her life was so simple, apparently so hidden and so simple. And yet everything that she did, every movement she made, was manifesting the nature of the Divine Mother. And that will only come in time, where we'll see the cosmic nature of the Holy Mother, the cosmic significance of the Holy Mother. So I'll close here.
I'll close with the prayer. Jnananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadmai Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhu. Mother Sri Sarada Devi and Sri Ramakrishna, world teachers, wrapped in thy enfolding care, we bow down to thee again and again.